You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor Podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Communications Business Advisor Podcast. Welcome to part one of a two-part series on comms and moms. The gender pay gap indicates that women are paid 83 cents to every dollar that a man earns. When you become a mother, that number drops to 71 cents. Now, in the next podcast, the one after the one today, I'm going to share some of your views about this topic, views from women in this field. I'm going to strip out the names and the companies to allow a little bit more of a candid conversation, specifically talking through the lens of motherhood. And if you're not a mother and annoyed with the constant discussion of what it's like for mothers, I get it, but hang in there with me for a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience first today. For a long time, I was a single woman in a corporate communications leader role, and it felt like the conversations around motherhood were everywhere because you might call me an old mom. I had my daughter at 39 years old. But before I get into that story, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it was like not being a mom in this field working in a corporate environment. I went a long time in this field without kids, and I remember that even when I wasn't a mom, there seemed to be an intense focus, both inside and outside the workforce, on my reproductive status. Let's start with the fact that I was regularly told that this is a field that it is great to be in if you want to become a mother, because there's so many women in it. There's inherent flexibility, which, by the way, I call BS on that notion, but regardless, there was a selling factor that was sold to me over and over and over and over that this is a great field if you want to become a mom. Like teachers, people would loudly exclaim. I was seriously sick of hearing it, even by the time I turned 25. And then when I was in my early 30s in a fairly senior position in a corporate environment, I remember being asked by a peer in a similar role, on the same level, if I had been out clubbing over the weekend. Now, don't get me wrong, I had fun in my single years, but I was never in my life a clubbing kind of gal. Still, his impression is he was around the same age as I was, but he was married with kids. That his impression was that this is what single people did. And especially single people who were in their late 20s. Yeah, remember when I said I was in my 30s? He did not know my age. I was not in my 20s. It was his impression, though, because I was single in a company where most people were married with children. So I must be young, at least younger than I actually was. And I guess some of them believed I was clearly out spending my time at raves or something like that, because in their minds, this is what single people did. I think looking back, I definitely overcompensated for this at the time. I was all business. I wanted to be taken seriously and probably came off as cold or entirely focused on work. I mean, I saw what happened when I shared even a small personal anecdote like I was single. So I didn't really want to talk with people about my weekends or frankly even ask them about theirs, because it would open up some conversations about my alleged clubbing lifestyle or something equally ridiculous. And let's be real, in this field, we are often the youngest leaders in a room full of so-called white hairs. If you add being single into the mix, then when you're surrounded by a bunch of older men who have a spouse and a lot of times grown kids, you're seen as even younger, and thus the fight to be taken seriously as a professional is even harder. And when I got married at 36, there were a ton of assumptions that I wouldn't be having kids, including an assumption from my boss. Well, I guess I'm assuming myself that he didn't think that I'd be trying to have kids, and I assume this because I was hiring on my team. And when a strong candidate came up, he told me I should really think about whether I wanted to hire her or not, because she just got married and might have kids soon. He was concerned for me that I'd really need to rely on this person given the huge amount of work that we had to do and the tiny team we had. And yeah, he said that out loud. The thing is, though, he just said out loud what so many people are thinking. If you're married and of a certain age, will she or won't she becomes a cornerstone of hushed conversations or even worries that aren't said out loud. Worries because of workloads that do not compensate for things like maternity leave, sick kids, or even leaving work on time, meaning at around 5 p.m. These are things that are thought by both men and women. My boss, he didn't know I was going through IVF at the time. I wasn't comfortable with him knowing, in addition to him telling me about this potential hire, who I hired anyway, by the way. She was the strongest candidate. He also shared at a team meeting that healthcare costs for our health insurance plan were increasing because of an increase in maternal claims and infertility treatments. So yeah, that was another reason why I didn't really feel comfortable talking to him about it. And that then put a huge amount of pressure on me at work. Subterfuge became the norm for me. I couldn't let him know that I was at doctor's appointments to check my follicle growth, or getting blood work taken daily, or meeting with my reproductive endocrinologist. I kept the 3 IUI cycles and my first IVF cycle a secret. From the start of testing to telling my boss that I was pregnant at 12-week gestation, it took about 8 months in total of keeping it quiet. Yeah, right at around when I was 12 weeks pregnant, I told him. Later, after I lost that first pregnancy in the second trimester, I decided I lost nothing by telling my boss and peers that it wasn't so easy for us to try again, which was a response that I knew others meant to deliver me comfort and was said with empathy, but it wasn't that easy for us to just try again. We needed IVF. That's a whole thing. And I just could not hear that we could just try again anymore from anyone. I did end up having my daughter after a couple more IVF cycles and a couple more embryo transfers. By that point, I was no longer working at that employer. I was laid off. Now, rewinding back again, let me tell you that story. Before I made my boss aware of my fertility treatments earlier that same year that I was laid off, I was promised a promotion by the end of that year, with my boss indicating that I had earned it, but it just wasn't a good time to promote anyone in the team for like internal political reasons, optics. So I waited. After all, I earned a consistently exceeds expectations review that year. Now, keep in mind, that is a review that was only reserved for 10% of people at the company, and they stuck with that. Due to stacked rankings, only 10% of the people would get consistently exceeds expectations in their performance review, and I was one of them. I knew I was good at my work, and I had this same boss for many years, so he knew what I was capable of. I knew that if for some reason I didn't get the promotion, if for some reason I was laid off, for example, because this is what, my crisis communications planning mind goes to, it would have nothing to do with my performance and everything to do with like restructuring or the company not doing well financially or something related. I figured, again, it was unlikely, but my crisis comms mind went to that place anyway. And ultimately it did happen. I was laid off. Around that same time, I had just experienced a second pregnancy loss, this time much earlier in the pregnancy, and I was gearing up for another IVF cycle. We were approaching the end of that same year when I had been promised that promotion, but instead I was laid off due to restructuring in the department. He decided he no longer needed my more senior level in that department and didn't need a peers level either. Now, honestly, it was eventually a really great thing for me, and I'm not mad about it. But that's not the point. Did my boss make the decision to lay me off because of my interest in becoming a mother, because I was going through IVF treatments? Did it even have anything to do with it? I don't know. I'll really never know. No one will. I don't even think he'd even know. I don't think he'd even recognize that this was a factor in his thinking, even if it was brought to his attention, even if it were true. Because here's the thing about bias. It's sneaky. It shows up without people even knowing it's there most of the time. It changes our behaviors, our actions, and our mindsets without us even knowing that it's there. I know because I've experienced it myself. I consider myself a proud feminist, yet there are times I catch myself thinking about something in a certain kind of way, and then I realize it was conditioning that led me to think that way. So here's an easy example. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked how many women on the Supreme Court would be enough, I expected her to say like 4 or 5. That would be equal representation with a 9-member court. But no, she said when there are 9. I was really surprised when I first heard this, wondering why she would want a court to be all women. But of course, she wasn't saying this. That wasn't the point. She was making a point with that statement. The point was no one questioned when the Supreme Court was all men. Why would they question it when it was all women? Wow. Right? I had never thought of it that way. Because I've seen the stories in the movies. There always seems to be one woman in the room with men making decisions. Think about any TV show or movie that you've seen. There's only room for one. There is one woman in that corporate boardroom, which makes welcoming women at the table, by the way, a ton harder if you're that woman. And everything around you since you were a child has subtly indicated that there's only room for one of you at that table. Everything that you see tells you there's one woman there. If it's you, there's not enough room for another. Okay, so that's the first part of my story. I did IVF, more IVF, and then a couple embryo transfers, and I finally had my daughter a little less than a year from my layoff. It was a high-risk pregnancy, not just because of my geriatric pregnancy, which, by the way, thank you, medical field, for that terrible term. But thankfully, she was born mostly healthy. I was back to my job search a few months after that, but I found that I was then getting recruited for all of these great roles, fantastic roles, that were very senior and recognized my expertise, but they required traveling into the city, which, if you know anything about Boston traffic, it is a nightmare. I lived 11 miles from the city, but about an hour and a half drive from any of the workplaces that were recruiting me. And forget about the T, which is the subway for any of you who are familiar. That's just wildly unreliable. It's a total joke in Boston. Added to that, the travel requirements for these positions were very high. This was all, by the way, pre-COVID. There were hybrid roles available for comms pros, but they were always reserved for employees that had been there a long time. Think about this. Pre-COVID. Those who had proven themselves to leadership already could work from home a couple days a week or at least one day a week. The idea of hiring someone remote or hybrid as a new employee, that was just not a thing. And especially not a thing in a leader role. I remember being told for one senior leadership role I was interviewing for that I need to physically be in the office every day to set the example for all of the other employees. I guess because the assumption was that if you wanted to work remotely, some of the time you then weren't taking your career seriously or you weren't on a leader track. Well, that's what the truth was at the time. For the first time in my career, I wondered if I had been too successful. Yeah, I hate that for me, and I hate that for so many of you. I wondered if I had been too successful because I'd either be overqualified for a lower level role or I'd be perfectly qualified and working like a madwoman. Eventually, I took a role about 10 minutes away from my home at a fairly big company for less responsibility than I had had in the past. But I was clear that I was going to leave at 5 p.m. and travel was just not an option for me. My hiring manager was definitely supportive of this. I was taking a step back in order to take a step forward in my life as a new mom. And it felt like my only viable choice if I wanted to be around even some of the time for the child that I worked so hard to create. And everyone around me was telling me that this was the solution. This was what a good mom quote unquote, would do. This is the only way. And by the way, when I say I wanted to spend some of the time with this kid that I created, took so much energy, physically, mentally, emotionally. I just wanted to know her. But I was just looking for some workplace that allowed me to pick up my kid at 5 p.m. and spend an hour or so at home with her before she went to sleep by 7. And maybe a work from home day once a week while my kid was at daycare so I could get some laundry done while working. It felt reasonable to me, but I had to give up that higher level role I was perfectly capable of doing to make it happen. But then I started working at this company where I knowingly took a step back, and I was frustrated every day. I didn't connect with the company culture. Most importantly, I hated the work that I was doing, which was well beneath my competency and skill set. I guess I learned in that experience that it was a mistake. Not their mistake, it was my mistake. I was not someone that can just quote unquote, ride the times in a lower level role. As much as I tried to, as much as I wanted to. I'm an ambitious overachiever, and honestly, I'm finally able to say that out loud. I'm proud of it. It's who I am, and that is entirely okay. It's actually really good. So at about a year mark, I quit that job. I took the summer off and set up my own business, and then I never looked back. But here's the thing. It felt like my only option at the time. The only option available to me at a leader level who wanted to do leader level work and also happened to be a mom that wanted to, surprise, surprise, spend some time being a mom, after 5 p.m. and on weekends. I know, the horror. Now, I'm incredibly happy as a business owner. It's exactly what I want to do, and I'm getting the opportunity to advocate for my field and the people in it, which is just amazing. It is exactly where I want to be. But it's also not for everyone. Seriously, even though it felt like my only opportunity, I also had a vision and my desire to build the business grew quickly, and it was an absolutely great fit. But I would not wish this as a solution upon someone who's lukewarm about the idea. I don't want every woman out there to be told that they should just freelance or consult or do their own thing when they have a baby or they want to have children, as if it's the only way that they can grow in their career and be a mother. Because it's not. The women in Raise the Tide and the women that I've met in this field since my experience starting my business show me this. And I have to share. The assertion to just freelance or just start contracting or whatever, it's just a really crappy way of telling women to get out of corporate because it's not meant for them. This is why I'm so dedicated to making the systems and structures change for us and helping women advance in the corporate environment and in this field. I've seen it. It can happen. Let's keep making it happen, working together. Now a quick break and I'll be right back. I created Raise the Tide to help elevate our field and the women in it. It's part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. It encompasses all of these things because it takes all of these things to rise in your career. I asked a few Raise the Tide crew members to share what their experiences have been like in the program, and here's what they had to say. What's one major impact Raise the Tide has had on you?
It's so important to have community across any part of our lives, and that's one way that Raise the Tide has had a major impact for me.
I'm at a time in my career where I'm looking to grow both from a business advisor and personally. And what I will say is I'm not necessarily getting what I need in terms of coaching and growth internally. And that's where Raise the Tide comes in.
Raise the Tide has given me the confidence to go and advocate for myself and never allow status quo and be always pushing for more and knowing your value and your worth and not being afraid to advocate for that.
If you're interested in this program, head on over to TaraMcDonagh.com and complete the Raise the Tide form. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide, raising the ships for our entire industry. I was recently at a work event with fellow entrepreneurs where one woman shared her experience as a mom, and then another woman immediately responded back saying her experience as a woman without children is hard too. And she went on and on and on about it. I'll be honest, I was really irritated because no doubt it is hard for all of us. But when a woman who has children talks about the experience of being a mother and the responses to assert that it's hard for you too, it feels a whole lot like dismissing our experience. We're not excluding you from this party. It's just another layer of complexity. Like, I guess I think of it as like, it's hard for women, but it is significantly harder for Black women. So instead of comparing, just listen. There is something called the motherhood penalty, and so we do have to address it. The motherhood penalty is proven to actually hit even harder if you're the main breadwinner in your family. And most of the women that I work with as leaders in the communications field, they are that main breadwinner. Yet, a lot of them, they also take on the majority of caretaking if they're mothers. And they get paid less than their peers in this field or related fields, statistically. Wild, huh? But when a woman who has children talks about the experience of being a mother and the responses to assert that it's hard for you too, it feels a whole lot like dismissing that mom's experience, shushing her, telling her that you're annoyed that she's not seeing your experience as difficult too, which leads to being shamed into silence. The reality is, numbers tell us that women who are moms get paid less. They are financially penalized for having children. The motherhood penalty. Conversely, men, they earn more when they have kids. The fatherhood bonus. Claudia Golden won the 2023 Nobel Prize in Economics for her research on the gender pay gap. She said that women's lives have greatly changed, but the labor market and the policies of governments are often slower to respond. Ain't that the truth? We don't need to change ourselves. We need to change the system. We need the system to catch up to where we are. We are not annoyed with one another. We are annoyed with the system, which is why things like remote work and hybrid work, they're so powerful for us, and why it's such a massive threat for women that are being forced back into the office. And yes, I will state it, even though it may annoy some, why it's a massive threat for mothers in particular. Now, if you're a child-free woman or a man that asserts that remote work has helped you too, that is wonderful. I don't claim that the only people return to the office hurts as women or moms. I'm just saying that we can be real about who it does help. It was said best by the former CEO at Elevest, Sally Krawcheck. She was speaking to a room of mostly male finance leaders at a big CFO event in New York, I think it was, in 2023. And she said, look around and see who's missing from this room. If we want to go back to the way it was, then acknowledge that you know it works mainly if you're a man and have a wife at home. She was talking about return to the workplace. On that note, I'm going to take one more quick break, and we'll be right back in a minute. I created Raise the Tide to help elevate our field and the women in it. It's part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. It encompasses all of these things because it takes all of these things to rise in your career. I asked a few Raise the Tide crew members to share what their experiences have been like in the program, and here's what they had to say. What would you tell someone who's interested in joining?
Do it. It honestly is probably one of the best things I've ever done for myself in my 20-plus year career.
I have received such benefit from this group. I cannot actually express it.
Invest in yourself. I really started this group because it was time for me to invest in me.
To anyone who's interested in joining Raise the Tide, I'd say the return might even end up being well beyond what you might expect. I walked in hoping for some professional clarity, and I've gotten that but also stayed for the growth and the support and the connection that has come to mean so much to me.
If you're interested in this program, head on over to taramcdonagh.com and complete the Raise the Tide form. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide, raising the ships for our entire industry. Now, I'm going to start with something here that might make you scream. We talked about the motherhood penalty. Now, let's talk about the fatherhood bonus. The fatherhood bonus means that you will actually earn more as a man when you become a father, and more for each child born. Well, women, again, earn less for every child. Wild, huh? Now, I'm not mad at men for this, and I'm not mad at anybody who is child-free. I'm mad at systems that treat us differently, systems that both men and women are part of. Many of you are probably wondering what I mean by that. Systems, how can women perpetuate bias against women? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the divide and conquer mentality that is thrust upon us as women, those who are child-free and those who are mothers. More than once when I was child-free, I heard from people that said things like the following, quote, "Women get 3 months off for having a kid. I love to have 3 months of vacation too. And I'll gladly pay into a system that subsidizes other women's maternity leave. But I also feel like it's not fair to leave others out of the opportunity to take time off." And from a fellow entrepreneur who wasn't aware that I had a young child, this person asserted that when selling comm services to clients, they assert that they won't be canceling meetings because of demands of young kids like illness or sports events. Why? Because they don't have kids or their kids are grown. As the mom of an elementary age kid, ouch, that hurt. And here's the thing, in each of these cases, it was a fellow woman who shared this. Yikes. Yet I also remember very well what it was like to be pushed to cover things for moms at the time when I was child-free, covering work. And it always seemed to be the moms, as I remember it, who had to go to kids' events or their kid was sick or out or something. And I like to say that I was empathetic, and I think I was, but in reality, I was also a bit annoyed, to be honest. And I was irritated that it felt like they were saying that their time was more important than mine. And in fact, I once said that. I told someone, "I understand you're a parent, but your time isn't more valuable than mine." And that's the truth. I will stand by that. Mom or not, my time is no less or more valuable than anyone else's. To have that child-free mom feel like she has to take on more for the women with kids, that sucks. And it's not okay for women with children to feel like they have no other choice but to rely on those who aren't currently caregivers, the child-free folks. But it's the system you're actually annoyed with, not the humans. I have to say that again. It is the system that you're actually annoyed with, not the humans. Just look at maternity leave. Why do so many colleagues grin and bear it through someone's maternity leave, trying to figure out how they'll get the work done with the remaining team members on hand, instead of hiring a contractor or a freelancer or increase agency budget temporarily to support the work while someone's out on leave? It leaves the woman who's about to have a baby feel crazy at a time when she should be preparing for the most significant life change that she will ever have. And it leaves those surrounding that woman who are about to go on leave feeling guilty that they want to support this big life change for their colleague with their whole entire heart. But a piece of them might be feeling a bit resentful that they're left with more work, or at least they're overwhelmed and a bit nervous about it. And when you're in a field like communications, that's an even more terrible thing because chances are you are already under budgeted and understaffed. So taking on more becomes unbearable, even if it's for the ridiculously few small weeks or months that most women take for maternity leave in the US. The whole system, it just sets up a great divide. Yes, the system, not the women, not the men, the system that we're all meant to work through and just figure out. Then there's the issue of childcare and return to work. I can't even get into daycare because that's a whole other animal. But here's a wild thing to consider. When we talk about systems, a standard kid's school drop-off in elementary school is around 8:30, 8:45-ish. Then they get out of school at around, let's say, 2:45. What workplace do you know that would let you begin your commute to work at 8:45 and leave at, say, 2:15 to make school pickup? Yeah, I don't know of any of those. Who picks up your kid if your partner has a job that doesn't allow it either? Or if you're a single parent? What if there's no after-school program or that after-school program is full? What if your company decided to mandate a return to the office mid-year when all of those after-school spots were already full? What if you don't have family nearby to help, or you can't get a babysitter in high school or college who's willing to take those regular ongoing hours reliably? And a nanny, they just think it's too few hours for them to make it worth it. These are all very real things that I hear from mothers every single day. And the response when they try to address it with their workplace to try to get any kind of grace, figure it out. Just figure it out. Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks. To have women with kids feel like her child-free colleagues resent her, or at the very least don't understand her, that sucks. To have women who are child-free feel the brunt of subtle judgment, sometimes veiled as curiosity, all around them, that they don't have children for whatever reason, which is none of anyone's business. And to hear some terrible things from colleagues like, I'd never work for a woman who doesn't have kids because they don't get it. Yikes. Yeah, I heard that more than once. What about a man who doesn't have kids? Why is that never said? So what does this all boil down to? Well, my plea here is simple, but it's not easy. Listen to each other and support each other as women. Stand up for each other in a way that is not exclusionary, but is curious and compassionate. Listen. Let's not allow divide and conquer. Let's not vilify. Let's understand it's the system we're upset with, not the humans. Let's listen without comparing. We're all women. We've all felt the expectations of a culture that values motherhood and yet doesn't support it in the corporate environment. Even if you aren't a mother, you've seen it. And we felt the expectation of having children or having to explain ourselves. I have no interest in us being divided into separate camps or dividing ourselves. We don't need to change ourselves. We need to change the system. Systems that reward a schedule that doesn't remotely align with the school schedule, that have no flexibility, systems that have no daycare at work, and when it's available, it's financially out of reach, systems that reward physical presence in the office. So let's start by listening and understanding and noticing how the systems don't give us a place to thrive. Then start working on action, which starts with, you know it, my fellow communications professionals, campaigning, spreading the word. Change the systems, not the women. Until next time, keep advising. If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out TaraMcDonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it.